This is my one and only paranormal or unexplained experience. I was never exactly a believer, but I never completely disregarded the existence of the otherworldly. So it happened a few years ago, sometime in winter 2016. I randomly woke up in the middle of the night, and the first thing I noticed was how dark my room was. Of course it was supposed to be dark, as I had all my lights off and the windows closed. But, you know, a little tiny bit of light from the outside streetlights always finds a way to enter from the edges of closed windows. Like, you can barely distinguish the pitch black from a slight aura light. But there was none of it. It was pitch black all around. I thought it was probably a power cut, and I started to think random stuff like, probably this is what blind people see all their life. Must be sad. And slowly drifting back into sleep, when I was suddenly reawoken by feeling my bed shaking. I thought I had fallen asleep, and this was one of those sleep jerks that happen when you fall in your dream. But then, more stuff started to happen. Soon after the first shake, there was a second one, which I felt much more clearly. A big rat had been invading our kitchen for a while. I thought maybe it had sneaked into my room, but how can a rat shake my bed? Then, a few seconds later, I felt a literal punch under my bed, as if someone punched the underside of my bed right under where I am. I felt my bed bump up at around my back. Oddly enough, instead of freaking out, I became extremely calm for some reason, and oddly enough again, I started to think of a logical reason. My mum made me check under my bed before sleeping, as she thought some thief might have sneaked in our home. She overthinks. I thought, maybe someone actually sneaked in this time, but why would he disturb me instead? I felt another 2 consecutive punches from under me. I froze for a solid minute, finally realizing things might be abnormal here. I don't know why, but after freezing initially, I went weirdly calm again, almost as if my brain went, oh no, it's a ghost, anyway. Then was a final punch, followed by the bed shaking. I remember as the bed was shaking, I got up almost subconsciously, walked straight to the light switch on the other side of the room, and turned the lights on. Nothing out of the ordinary. I looked under my bed with the flashlight. Also, nothing. I should have freaked out here, but I didn't, which is odd for someone like me, who gets nervous and shaky for even the simplest of social situations. My body worked almost on its own here. I turned the lights off, took the flashlight with me to bed, and fell asleep as soon as I hit the bed. And then, it was morning. Nothing ever happened after that. Okay, so before I start the story, I need to mention that this happened a long time ago. I was incredibly young. I must have been around 6 or 8 years old. I can't give a specific time, but I can give a specific place. This happened at the Gatlinburg Town Square Resort, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. I still go on vacation there, but haven't had an experience like this since. So, backstory. I had no sort of imagination that could have this happen. No imaginary friends as far as I can recall. I wish I did. I was a lonely kid. I never saw night terrors under the beds before. Never even had monsters scaring me when I was a child under my bed. Back to the subject. This was a family trip with my uncle, dad, mum, and paternal grandmother. I remember there used to be beds without anything under the bed. They've since been replaced with queen sizes and full sizes, I think. I was sleeping in a room with my grandma, a room with 2 beds. Either that or I went to another room to sleep with her, because I was so shaken. Well, we were going to sleep. Everything was peaceful until I heard a groan from under the bed I was sleeping in. I'm quite startled by sudden noises, so I hesitantly looked to see what was under the bed. I came to instantly regret that decision. For the record, I believe that children can imagine monsters from under the bed, but this wasn't some stereotypical fluffy, scary monster, or even something that looked mean. No big mean claws, no big black shadow. No, this was horrifying to look at. The closest thing I can compare this thing to is that guy when he's mid-transformation to a fly hybrid from that movie, The Fly. Except there was something distinctly different. It wasn't greasy looking. It looked dry, like a mummified corpse. Eyes looking milky like a corpse would look like. Teeth falling out, looking angry, reaching out for me. I was so terrified of this thing, I didn't even scream. I didn't even talk about it properly. All I did was run to my grandma. I would then tell her I needed to sleep in her bed because, quote, something scared me. She groggily complied and let me sleep in the bed with her. I didn't really say anything to anybody at that point. Years passing, I would occasionally mention it, but I would be dismissed. But this caused me to not want to sleep in my own bed for so long. To repeat, I didn't have a good imagination. I never saw a corpse before when I was a kid. I'm still yet to tell anyone about this in such detail. I feel relief, but still, I have to wonder what the hell that thing was. I'm skeptical of paranormal things happening, but I still haven't found an explanation for what I experienced. I used to sleep in a room that my grandfather used before he passed away. He moved into my house the last 2 years of his life because he was left alone after my grandmother passed away and needed help being taken care of. Before that, I slept in a garage converted to a room, but we ended up needing the space for storage. After my grandfather passed and his room was available, I moved into his room. When the bed shaking first started happening, I took my mattress off and flipped the bed over, thinking that rodents had somehow gotten inside the mattress, and I was feeling them run around inside of it. That's kind of what it sounded like. Just light but rapid tapping of the mattress at many different spots underneath me. I inspected every inch of the bed and mattress, but found nothing. And nothing on the floor either. No trace of any animal. It would always start happening when I had shut off the lights, and as soon as I sat up in bed, it would stop. When I'd lay back down, it would start up again after a minute or two. It got to the point where it would wake me up after falling asleep. I ended up being very sleep deprived for as long as it lasted. This went on for about 3 months. After the first month, I got rid of my mattress and bought a new one, but the problem persisted. It felt like a person or persons were lying underneath the bed and were slightly punching it from below at different spots fairly rapidly. The noise was like a pitter-patter of rapid tapping, so it also felt almost like there were a bunch of mice inside the mattress, darting very quickly back and forth, as if I could feel it as they bumped into the areas of the mattress I was laying on, or something like that. Never heard any squeaks or found any evidence of rodents though, and there was no pipes underneath and no basement below the house. Sometimes, out of frustration, I would slam my fist into the mattress in hopes that if there were mice or some type of living creature that somehow had gotten into my mattress, that me hitting the bed very hard a few times would make it stop. But it wouldn't stop. I would also place my hand between my body and the mattress to check and see if I was having some type of muscle spasms at different parts of my body, but there were no spasms. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was causing it. When I would sleep on the sofa in the living room, I didn't experience the issue, but the sofa just wasn't comfortable to sleep on, and I would only sleep in there on occasion where I was so exhausted from sleep deprivation that I was able to fall asleep while being uncomfortable. It got to the point where I was afraid to go to sleep. I was a grown man who doesn't believe in the paranormal, but I was afraid for whatever reason. I guess it's because it's so bizarre and I couldn't find an explanation after all that time spent trying to figure it out. At one point, I went out of town with my brother and stayed with my aunt for the weekend, and it was really refreshing. The bed didn't shake, and I slept very well. I talked to my brother and told him the issues I was having at home, but he never had any issues like what I was experiencing. It changed from just an annoying occurrence into something that was scary after I stayed the weekend at my aunt's. Normally, when I would sit up in bed, it would stop, but it changed to where it would keep going after I sat up, and I could really feel the bed shake and hear the bed creaking as it shook. Below my bed was an empty space. The floor was about 6 inches below the bottom of the bed. Then, one day, it just stopped. I never felt anything out of the ordinary just after one random day that it stopped. But for weeks after, I was still afraid when I went to bed. This happened several years ago, and I still sleep in the same room. I'm wondering if anyone has ever heard of anything like this happening to someone else. I'm 100% certain that it was not my imagination. I clearly felt it and heard it for a period of weeks, every single night, and I was wide awake when it happened. It's so weird when I think about it. I took a very scientific approach to try and understand what was happening, but came up empty in finding any explanation. In November of 2017, my new girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I had only been dating a month when we took our first weekend getaway. We live in southern Illinois and drove about 5.5 hours to Chattanooga, Tennessee to see Ruby Falls, the giant underground waterfall attraction, and Rock City, Lookout Mountain. Both great attractions, but unless you live within 7 hours or are just passing through to another great location for a day or so, I really wouldn't recommend making a family vacation of it. The area is mostly pretty, and my lady and I, being the stoners we are, of course love a picturesque cityscape, especially with mountains present. We were only in Chattanooga for about a day overall, as it was dark out when we got there Sunday evening. We really only had time to go to dinner. The next day, we went to the aforementioned attractions, and the last thing we did, as it was getting dark soon, was to go to Rock City, where they have this weird, completely dark cave area that is full of glow-in-the-dark fairy tale creatures and classic story characters. It's truly trippy, to be honest, a surreal visual experience. But instead of taking our time looking at the individual sections of the exhibit like we had planned, my wife was now very insistent that we leave Tennessee as soon as possible. She wouldn't tell me what was going on, but something in her eyes said it was all very wrong, and being new to the relationship and not wanting to upset her, I grabbed her hand and we rushed out of there. We grabbed a coffee and dinner about halfway back home, when she told me that she felt an evil, angry entity present where we were in the cave exhibit, and that it was so overwhelmingly negative that we had to leave. While I didn't feel that myself personally, I will say it is a weird place to say the least, so I kind of dropped it and we made our way back home around 1 AM. We showered and went to sleep about half an hour later, as we were very tired from the whole weekend of travel. Now, here's where the experience actually occurred. About an hour or so after falling asleep, I suddenly awoke to the very dark feeling of dread. Like everything in the world was wrong, and it was the same feeling that I had when I saw my wife's eyes earlier that day in the trippy cave exhibit. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore it, when in my mind's eye, I saw, or even now I'll admit possibly imagined, a horribly skinny, charred black arm, with a hand that had only 3 fingers, with razor-sharp black claws, reaching up from under the bed and reaching for my wife. It was so real that my heart started pounding, and I was absolutely terrified. That's when my wife let out the most horrifying scream I've ever heard in my entire life. And then she jumped out of our bed and ran for her life, and was almost to the front door of our apartment when I finally grabbed her and helped her to get control of herself. I've never seen so much fear and horror in the eyes of someone I've loved before. She told me right there that there was no way we were staying the night at our place that night with what happened, and I agreed. It was very late, but I called my parents and they let us sleep in the guest room at their house. After I got my wife to calm down and go back to sleep, I privately told my dad what happened and what I saw, and him being the very religious man he is, said that what was attacking us was certainly a demon, and the black 3-clawed arm was meant as a mockery to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. This shook and unsettled me. For another 2 years, I kept what I saw that night to myself, until when my wife finally brought it up one day and told me she felt something very evil, with sharp nails, reaching out and grabbing her from under the bed. I finally confirmed my side of the story to her, because up until then, she was under the impression that it was her alone that knew what was going on that night, and she was mortified when I finally told her. We're both glad we're no longer in that apartment, and we agreed that while we never needed to hear each other's side of the story to know what happened exactly as it occurred that night, it definitely helped us grow as a couple to have that horrible experience. I'm usually kind of skeptical, but I'm also open to different opinions. Our family has experienced many unusual and creepy things for many years, but that kind of calmed down in the last year. I don't know why, but since last week, my mum and I started praying and lighting protective incense almost every night. We also bathe ourselves in lavender products, which, in our religion, is considered to drive away bad entities. Where we live, there aren't raccoons, nor possums, nothing like that, only cockroaches. In the suite sleeps my mum, her husband, and 3 cats, Chico, Simba, and Pipoca. They're pretty chill cats, don't like fighting, and they also love their humans. We also have other cats, but they sleep in a little shed in the backyard. The 3 I mentioned get along amazingly. This morning, Mum was looking disturbed in the kitchen, and then she told me she was awake in bed, eyes open, waiting for her husband, who was in the bathroom getting ready for work with the door closed. Then she started hearing a deep growl under the bed on the right side, and on the left side under the bed, she heard Pipoca intensely hissing. Mum thought maybe Pipoca was fighting Chico or Simba underneath, which would be extremely unusual since they're friends. Then she saw Chico and Simba were sleeping on top of her bed close to her. Then she thought I had brought one of the backyard cats into her room, which is something I also don't do. I was still asleep in my room, The deep growl continued, in her words, sounding like a very angry animal. The hissing and growling was non-stop and lasted around 6 minutes. She got up to check which cat I supposedly let into her room, and when she got fully up, the sound stopped. She saw that Pipoka was hiding behind a case or something and looking directly under the bed, tail up, and her fur was all spiky. Then Pipoka ran to the bathroom, which is her hiding spot, but the door was closed. She got up on 2 paws and tried to open the bathroom door, scratching it. Mum ducked down and searched under the bed, only to find nothing. No animals, no nothing. As Pipoka failed to open the bathroom door, she ran underneath the shoe rack. Mum checked the bed again. Pipoka stayed there for 15 minutes until my stepfather left the bathroom. Then she ran immediately into the bathroom and hid in one of the drawers. My mother checked the whole room and the house, looking for any loose animals, and couldn't find anything. Upon hearing this story almost an hour later, I suggested we go to the room with the 3 cats to pray, cleanse, and ask whatever it was in there to leave the house, our family, and animals alone. Our prayer took 30 minutes approximately. I kid you not, the exact moment we finished our prayers and said amen, Pipoka, after hiding in there for so long, calmly left the bathroom and went underneath the bed to chill. We also felt very relaxed and safer in the room afterwards. Before, we were tense and kind of scared. Now Pipoka is sleeping on the bed like a princess. So, what could have happened here? So my boyfriend is out of town for a week, and I've got the apartment to myself. I spent yesterday cleaning and playing a retro video game, and then went to bed around 3 AM. We've known for a while that our apartment is haunted. It's just a block away from a graveyard. Anyway, I always sleep facing the wall that our bed is up against, with just a pillow between me and it. My dog sleeps on his bed, which is at the foot of ours, and the cat has a bed under the table, which we have our air conditioner on, because its hose doesn't reach the window without it. And yeah, I know, single hose units are terrible. I woke up around 5:30 AM and saw a hand in front of me on the bed. It looked like a normal hand or arm coming out from under the blankets. But there was really no room in front of me for someone to be laying there. I grabbed the hand, I don't know why, and I felt it jump like I startled whoever it was attached to. Then I heard a voice come from under the bed, and it went, "Huh?" My dog and cat bolted out of their beds and ran out of the room. Then the hand just vanished, and I was laying there holding nothing. I had a feeling I shouldn't reply, thought whatever, and went back to sleep. I don't know why I felt impelled to grab the hand, and I don't know why it didn't scare me. I know I wasn't dreaming because I could read the clock, and when I'm dreaming, I have sort of a hazy pressure feeling, and I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because my pets reacted to it. Maybe one of our ghosts. Big things never happen when my boyfriend is home. The occasional light will turn on or off, and the cupboards sometimes open and close themselves. We've seen a shadow peek into our room, but we've never felt like we were in danger from the usual stuff. This was just so odd that I had to share it. I wanted to share some experiences from before that I still can't explain to this day. There was a time when I was around 6 or 8. I woke up early in the morning, still very tired, to this lady who I've never seen before, standing beside my bed, looking down to this little shelf I had sitting next to my bed. When she saw that I was awake and staring at her, she looked at me saying, "You woke up? It's okay, go back to bed," while patting my head until I fell back asleep. Later that day, when I remembered what happened that morning, I went to ask my parents if someone came into my room that morning, and they both told me that they didn't let anyone in that morning, nor did they see anyone go into or out of my room. This is still something I think about from time to time, because I never saw the lady before, nor did I ever see her again. There was another time where I had to sleep in my little brother's room, as someone was staying over and needed to use my room because it had more space. My brother liked to play with these WWE action figures, and my mum bought him this really big John Cena figure, where only the arms and legs can be moved forwards and backwards. Well, whenever I slept in his room, it wasn't very clean, with toys all over. In the morning, I got woken up by a really loud bang coming from under the bed. When I realized it came from under the bed, I just laid there for a couple of minutes, too scared to move. When I finally got the courage to get up, I jumped from the bed and ran out of the room. After a while, when I calmed down a little, I went back in to check and see what it was. When I looked under the bed, I saw the big John Cena figure laying face up with one of its legs up to the bed. After that, I went under to grab it and put it in the closet. I don't know if it was the figure that made the loud bang, but at the time, I really thought it was the figure that did it. I was always scared of any doll that looked human-like, because I was afraid that they would get up and start moving. And that morning really didn't help that fear get any better. About a week or so ago, I started noticing things moving on their own, and started seeing things out the corner of my eye. At first, I blew it off because I tried to stay skeptical, but yesterday, while I was doing classwork in my bed, I had a phone charger next to me when it suddenly fell off, and when I looked to see where it was, I saw a black, almost fur-covered hand reaching out from under my bed. I moved off and tried to stomp on it, and when I moved down, it darted back underneath, but when I went to see what it was, there was nothing. Then, this morning, when I was getting ready to take a shower, I noticed the shower curtain moving, and as I walked into the bathroom, a face peered out and quickly ducked back behind the curtain. I ran into my room, grabbed a knife, and barged in, ready for there to be an intruder. But then I pulled the curtain back, and once again, nothing. I'm only 16, so I can't exactly up and move, and I didn't really have a choice but to try and go at whoever or whatever was in the shower, because my little sister was in the next room. I honestly should have dialed 911. It seemed like a good idea at first, but then when it vanished twice, I didn't exactly think that police would believe that. I didn't know what else to do. If anyone has a clue what kind of spirit or ghost or whatever it could be, please let me know. I'm willing to try anything, because it's starting to freak me out. And it's not just this house. My parents are divorced, so I stay at my mum's and dad's depending on the day, and I see it at both houses, and even once at work. I just need to know what to do. I'll keep this short. I was thinking back to some events when I was younger that I thought I would share. When I was about 12 years old, my family and I, that is, my parents and me, moved into a new house across town. From the moment we moved there, I got the creeps. I would be home alone, and I would swear I could hear the back door jiggle. And I'd race there, and nothing would be there. Also, I would hear footsteps on the roof, which was creepy, but I shrugged it off as an animal of some type. This is where the real weird stuff happens. So my room had basically one long window all the way around it. Small room, and from laying in my bed, I could see the hall. I was going to sleep one night, and I remember being scared and not wanting to go to sleep in the room. I'm just starting to doze off, and I feel my cat jump up at the foot of my bed. I can feel the ripples from her feet walking up towards my head. This whole time I have my arm out to meet her halfway, but I never feel her. I open my eyes and look, and she's in the hallway cleaning herself. Shortly after that fun event, I hear noises under my bed, which turns from clicks into deep growling, which made me immediately leave the room. My mum made me go back, and after the growling began again, and I'm laying there, freaked out. All of a sudden, a bang hits my window, and then it's quiet. So I immediately say I'm not sleeping in there tonight. And nothing really happened after that, just one big event. I had some weird times. Not sure if they can be explained or not, but here we go. When I was 17, I went to live with my dad. It was a difficult time because he was suffering with mental illness. A part of this, after he was discharged from hospital, was that he wanted front door type locks on all of the doors in the house, so you needed a key to get in any room. I worried about if there was a fire and such, but it comforted him and helped him feel secure, so I went with it. Anyway, my room always made me feel creepy and uncomfortable. Little weird things would happen, like I would be reading a book at night, drop it down by the side of my bed when I fell asleep. When I woke up, it would be on my drawers on the other side of the room. Or I would be listening to music, and suddenly the power would cut out, or the radio would suddenly change to another station. Sometimes I would come home from school and things had been moved around in my room. But I just thought maybe my dad has been in here, don't make a fuss. Then something really odd started happening. I had a big rug in the middle of the room, and in the morning when I got up, the rug would have moved a little, like it had been dragged. I thought nah, at first, I'm imagining this. But night after night, it kept happening, moving further each time. One time, it was curled over by the wall. Obviously, with my dad, I didn't want to escalate his mental health by mentioning these things, just putting it down to my own tiredness or stress. So I rearranged my room, putting my bed over the rug. Feeling satisfied that my rug couldn't move, I dropped off to sleep soundly that night, but was awoken to my bed being jerked. I woke up absolutely terrified, switched the light on, and the rug had been dragged out from under the bed. Now, there was a lock on that door. There was no one in the room but me. As scared as I was, I didn't say or do anything about this, just rearranged my room back to how it was and tried to ignore any other weird stuff that went on. I left at 18. Fast forward to a few years ago. My dad was clearing some things and asked me to help. Some of my stuff was still there. At the bottom of my wardrobe, I came across a book. Really old book written in 1937 on divination. I had never seen it in my life. I asked my dad, "Hey, what's this?" And he was like, "Ah, weird. That was here when I moved in. I thought I threw it out. Is it yours?" Still always on eggshells with him, I was like, yeah, maybe it's mine. I took it the hell out of there and gave it to a friend of mine who loves paranormal stuff. But for me, I'm glad it's out of that house. If I see my dad, he comes to visit me. Even as a grown adult, nope. I ain't staying at his place. I've had a lot of experiences. It all started when I was about 5 years old. There was always knocking on the walls at night, and every time I walked past my bathroom, I would see a dark figure in there out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there was never anyone there. Sometimes it would be standing, sometimes sat on the edge of the tub. The most memorable experience at my house was when I was sitting on my parents' bed facing the master bathroom. Behind me was a set of glass French doors that led to the patio. My older brother was away at camp or at our cousin's house, and it was in the middle of a hot summer day. Both my parents walked into the bathroom, and as my mum crossed the threshold, a dark shadow reached out from under the bed and receded back underneath. I tried to explain it away. Oh, a car passed by with the headlights on and it made a shadow. But that didn't make sense even at the time, because the patio doors were facing the backyard, which had thick woods at the edge, and it was in the middle of the day. Fast forward through horribly vivid and gory nightmares, almost clairvoyant dreams, and knocking on my wall above my head at night, to another high school graduation in 2012 and 13. I was sleeping at my boyfriend's house in his room, which was in the basement. There was constantly something scurrying around in the drop ceiling. We thought it was rats or some type of rodent, but there was never any evidence, droppings or shredded piles, etc. We even took a tile out of the ceiling and looked around with flashlights. Still, there was nothing. After about a month of this happening, we started to ignore it. Then, his closet door would open by itself. And I don't mean just swing open. The doorknob would turn. Sometimes we would catch it opening, but the door closed properly. We jiggled the handle after closing it a ton of times. And it was hung properly. His dad and uncle were contractors in their day, so we knew it was being opened by something. After about 2 months into this, I was sleeping through the day after a 12-hour night shift, and woke up with sleep paralysis. It was pitch black, except I could see this blue woman. She appeared to be glowing, dressed in a flowing white or grey gown, long dark hair, and the most sinister, twisted smile I've ever seen. In her hand was a large knife. She tilted her head at me and lifted the knife over my chest and stabbed me repeatedly. When the knife went into my heart, I bolted upright and sat in bed, trembling, sweating and crying. Every single spot where the knife had hit me was tingling, almost burning. I clutched my chest, unable to calm down for what seemed like hours. His mum came into the room, asking if I was okay. Apparently, I had been yelling. I told her what happened, and she said it was probably just a dream. 2 nights later, I'm back on day shift. My boyfriend and I are in bed, my head on his chest. Just as I'm about to fall asleep, I open my eyes to look at him, and it's her, the glowing blue lady. I go to pull away, and I hear her yell, "No, wait." I bolted right out of bed and went outside for air. That was the last time I saw her. This didn't happen to me, but to my older sisters. I wasn't born yet. One of the main things about my mother is that she's a very spiritual Catholic. She kind of borders between being a devout Catholic, but I think she's more spiritual. She always told us that if we ever got scared, we should say the Holy Family's names and pray. Anywho, my older sisters told me that during this time, they had shared a room and a bed. They said that every night, they would hear and feel something scratching under their bed. They told my mum, and she just told them to clean their room. A few nights later, they felt and heard it again. The next morning, they again told my mum, and again she told them to clean, but this time, do a really deep job when it came to under the bed. They did this, and later, my mum told them that again, if they felt scared, they should say the Holy Family names and pray. It didn't happen that night, but eventually, it did happen again. This time, my sister said what our mother said, and the scratching stopped. Thinking it was over, my sisters settled back into their bed, only to have the bed snagged by something, shaking it a little. They ran over to my mum's room and slept there. Morning came and my sisters went to school, Dad to work. My mum said that she decided to check under their beds this time and clean it herself. She did, and was shocked to see fingernail scratches embedded into the wood under the bed. She said they were deep and long, and she knew in that moment something wasn't right. She said she put everything back, stood in the middle of the room, and basically told the thing off. She told whatever the thing was that it wasn't welcome in her home, that in the name of her faith that gave her protection and strength, it needed to leave. She turned on her heel to leave, closing the door. My mum told me that a loud bang came from the door, shaking it a little as she made her first steps. She spun around, reopened the door, and again recited what she said prior, but said it a little louder and a little more pissed. The room didn't give them any more trouble, and they soon moved again. We're a military family, so moved around a lot. My mum doesn't like to be pushed around, often defends herself in any situation, and she said that included the paranormal, that thought it could mess with her children. I figured I'd share because it helps to not feel alone with this. My mum's boyfriend's aunt passed away. He inherited her house and had to deal with all the belongings. My mum bought some of her collectibles that her boyfriend thought my step-kiddos would like. Wolf figurines, interesting knickknacks, and several dolls. During the following 3 months, several times a week, I'd feel a bumping under my bed, as if there was a cat or something trying to push up the mattress. Towards the 3rd month of this happening, an increasing frequency, I started to hear scratches from my closet door and bathroom door. My husband never felt the bed move, but he works day shift and I work nights, so I'm normally awake when he's asleep. I was getting pretty scared. It finally clicked. Everything started happening once that stuff came in the house. I asked my mum if there was anything of note, and it turned out one of the dolls was over 100 years old, and was not only his deceased aunt's, but her grandmother's as well. I was spooked, and felt like I was going crazy. My very understanding and open-minded friend came over, and we burned it on my grill. The next morning, it hadn't burned all the way. Her wooden basket and her face somehow survived. That night, I had my husband drench it and burned it thoroughly. The bumping and scratches stopped. I tossed the grill. I ended up moving about 6 months later. I still let them keep the wolf figurines, but everything else, nope. Never had an experience like that ever. I had been telling my husband and mum about it for months, feeling awful, and you can only rationalize so many times. Just grateful nothing untoward happened since. A few summers ago, my husband and I were asleep on our bed. We used a quilt to cover up because the AC made the room very chilly. I had woken up around 6 a.m. to the quilt being pulled off me. I watched the quilt slowly being pulled off my body. I froze for a minute, then I pulled the sheets back up and tried falling back asleep, trying to disregard what just happened. At about 6:15 a.m., it happened again. This time my husband woke up and saw me staring at the quilt sliding off our bodies. "What the hell is going on?" he asked me while trying to pull the quilt back up. "I don't know, but this is the second time it's happening. I don't know why." He suddenly got up and started to check the sides and front of the bed. He saw nothing, and it wasn't our cat because she wasn't in the room. We couldn't explain what was happening. You would think there was something under the bed, but there wasn't. We don't have an under the bed. We have a wooden platform with no space in between, just the platform and the box spring and the mattress. What the hell was pulling our quilt? So for most of my childhood, I've had an imaginary friend. I eventually grew out of it, I thought, but I never quite felt alone. In 6th grade, about a decade ago, I had unexplained seizures. In the hospital, they had me counting backwards from 100, and when I got to 85, I paused, freezing up completely, then continued like nothing ever happened. My mum has told me that when that pause happened, the room felt unsafe, small, dangerous. Fast forward a few years, and I'm having unexplainable kidney pains. As it turns out, there was this thing that had been following me since I was born, or nearly that early. It took an interest in me because I have a few talents where the paranormal is concerned. But fast forward a few months back, and I was being terrorized by this thing. It would stand outside the doorway of my room and just watch me. And the next night, it would be a step closer, and a step closer. I don't have a vehicle yet, and I would get back from work after dark on my bike, and I would see huge shadows in the dark. One time, it was at the end of my road. There were no lights on my road, and it was like a black hole in the night, and it would get closer and closer each time I came back. It's giving me chills just remembering. It radiated pure malevolence and evil. I would be cowering under my blanket, crying, frozen, barely able to breathe, trying not to piss myself because this thing was terrifying beyond words. It was that feeling where your chest hurts, like it's in a vice grip, and I'm not really a fearful person. Anyway, it kept getting closer and closer, and I couldn't take it anymore. I called my friend, who happens to be Wiccan, and she essentially kicked its ass in the astral plane or whatever it is. She blasted it with spiritual energy or something. I didn't ask for the details, but she was still on the phone with me when I felt a different presence. And then, there was a weird, gravelly shout. And it was gone. But it kept coming back as she was trying to set up protections in my room. It hid under the bed, and as I was walking to my computer, my ankle got cold as hell, and I felt like I could collapse. But I couldn't move, even to fall. I could barely whisper as I told her that it was under my bed. In my whole life, nothing has been more terrifying than that moment. It grabbed me, and I could physically feel it, even though nothing was there. She threw it out again. She finished setting up temporary defenses in my room, and it went to her house and tried to kill her. It shook her house, and it threw scissors off of her shelf and tried to drain the energy of one of her dogs. The next day, she came over and put in proper wards. Ever since it has been locked out of the house, my family has been arguing a lot less, and we're all a lot happier, and none of them knew about what happened. It had been feeding off my energy for years. I have energy scarring on my kidney where the feeding point was. I can feel roughly where it is when I'm near it because it took so much of me. And the truly terrifying thing is it's still wandering around my property. And if I'm out at night too long, if it notices me, it will try to kill me. It already has several times. I've had various other encounters with paranormal experiences, but that one was the most terrifying. It had been a long day spring cleaning my room. I wasn't done, so all the things I had under my bed were piled up in the corner of my room. I washed my face and brushed my teeth, as that's my usual night routine, and then I went to bed. I was really tired and looking forward to getting some sleep. While laying in bed, I could feel the presence of someone in the room. I ignored it because it happens all the time. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, and suddenly I could feel someone slowly laying down beside me. I froze, and then I felt a hand brushing against my leg. Scared to my bones, I jumped up and turned on the light, and guess what? No one was there. Still scared and in shock, I sat down on the bed with my feet on the floor, and just when I finally calmed down, someone grabbed my leg from under the bed and tried to pull me down under. I quickly pulled up my legs and crawled to the corner of my bed, tears starting to fall down my cheeks, and I took my phone and texted my brother and mother. I cried until my brother came into my room, and I just knew one thing. I did not want to sleep in my room that night. And from now on, I always have a bunch of boxes and other stuff under my bed. In 1988, I rented an old wooden house with my then wife. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was awakened by a very creepy noise, which would alternate from loud, irregular chanting to an almost whisper-like eerie hiss. It was like nothing I've ever heard. The hair on the back of my non-believer neck stood completely on end. Frankly, I was freaking the hell out and questioning my denial of the supernatural realm. I urgently woke up my wife, but communicated to her to say nothing and just listen. I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining the whole thing or dreaming. In just a few seconds, her eyes grew as large as saucers, and I received my answer. She clearly heard it too, and was so terrified that she wasn't even able to speak at first. Finally, she summoned up the courage to whisper to me, "What is that?" I shook my head in bewilderment. I had no explanation to give. The inhuman whisper didn't seem to be bothered at all by our awareness of it, and only the thundering beat of my heart partially drowned it out. It was very close to us, sounded less than 3 feet away, and as the man of the house, I was expected to investigate what it was. The hiss was actually coming from underneath our bed, specifically directly under my side. I didn't have a bedside table or lamp, so the only way to turn on the light was to get up and walk over to the wall switch in the dark. You can probably understand why I was hesitant to do that. A little light did filter in from the streetlight across the road through our curtained window, but it wasn't very much, and not nearly enough to make me feel brave enough to investigate. Worse still, the ungodly whispering continued on, unabated. With courage I finally dredged up from somewhere I'll never know. I leaned over and peered underneath the bed to confront the unknown source of our terror. Slowly, my eyes adjusted to the near total darkness under the bed, and I made out what was haunting us. Each night, we carried a jug of water to bed with us so we didn't have to get up and go to the kitchen for a drink. One of those half-gallon sized orange juice jars with a metal lid. I quickly surmised that the hiss and chanting was actually coming from that darn possessed jug. The metal lid wasn't screwed on completely, and trapped air was escaping out of the partially screwed on lid. After realizing that our chanting ghost was actually just escaping air from the water jug, we had a good little laugh, but it made me realize how brittle my disbeliever courage was. Less than a month later, I found myself with a nearly identical repeat of the situation, except I knew for a fact that we hadn't brought the water jug to bed with us. This time, the hissing was different and sounded like a feral animal on the attack. Note that we didn't have any pets. Again, I woke my wife. She listened and heard the same close-by screeching, hissing noise that I did. I didn't have to remind her that we left the water jug in the fridge. She remembered that too. We both stared at each other in the dark. The noise was angry and threatening. It was almost like a series of guttural growls and fiery hissing. This time, it seemed to be a little further away than the first time, but still incredibly close. I pulled back the curtain and looked outside. Nothing. My heart raced. It was definitely coming from right outside the window, and yet, there was nothing I could see out there. The streetlight lit up the yard well enough to even see individual blades of grass, and yet the unexplained hissing continued. Finally, I stood up, put my face against the glass, and peered down as sharply as I could. I was able to solve the mystery. 2 or 3 cats had cornered a possum, and they were all having a hissing match near the side of the house. Only by looking directly down at an acute angle could I see them. In the dark, in the sterile stillness of the night, little unexplained things can seem like big unexplained things. When I was in the 4th grade, we moved to Mississippi. We moved into a mid-sized 3-bedroom ground-level house. It was pretty old, and there were several neighbors living close by. We lived there for several months before anything started happening. My first memory is getting up in the middle of the night to take a leak. As I was standing at the toilet doing my business, I heard heavy breathing outside of the window. The window itself was very small. It was open so I could hear crickets and such outside too. From the outside, the bathroom window was probably 11 to 12 feet off the ground. I can remember being a bit scared, but I wasn't petrified at the time. I went back to bed and eventually fell asleep. A few nights later, I heard it again. This time, it was coming from outside my bedroom window. My window was open and very low to the floor. It was so low to the floor, I could duck through it and walk outside, which I had done many times. The breathing was loud, and it was so close I could have reached out and touched whoever it was. I did get scared then. I got under the sheets and covered my head. The next morning, I asked my brother about it. He and I shared a room. He was on one side and I was on the other. He said he hadn't heard anything and seemed very disinterested. My grandmother's room was right next to ours, and I asked her about it. She made a joke and ridiculed me, so I didn't ask her anything else. I told my parents about it, and my dad dismissed it too. Crap, I say to myself. Why won't anyone believe me? The breathing became more pronounced and louder and more frequent. One night, it was coming from my closet. Now it was in the house. My bed was right next to my closet. The shelves in the closet doubled as rungs into the attic, and the thought that something could come out of there and take me up there scared the hell out of me. I went to wake my parents up, and they got angry with me. They told me to go back to bed, so I did. All night long, I heard the breathing, and I never did get used to it. I began to plead with my parents to believe me. Then, one day, in broad daylight, I was in the living room watching television. My mother was in the kitchen making dinner. My dad was at work. My brother was out of the house, and my grandmother was next door visiting the neighbor. I heard my mother scream and a glass break. I ran into the kitchen just in time to see the screen door slam shut. I followed whoever it was outside, but there was nobody there. My mum said it looked like a hobo, a homeless man who was extremely dirty and tattered. The neighbors said the description sounded like a guy named Homer Rawls or Riles, something like that. Anyway, he died years prior and was a heavy smoker. He made his living doing odd jobs around people's houses. That was the first and last time anyone in my family saw anyone. Heck, that person could have been some transient that stumbled into our house. One night, my grandmother turned on every light in the house, knocking on the walls and bedroom doors and telling us to get up. My dad woke up, and Grandma said someone was under her bed. My dad, my brother and me all got down on our hands and knees and looked under the bed, but there was nobody there. Still, we could hear loud and clear, raspy breathing that I'd been trying to tell everyone about for weeks. My brother and I slept in the living room with Grandma that night. From then on, we all went to bed expecting to hear the breathing, but we never talked about it. My parents didn't make fun of me anymore either. Eventually, we moved out of that house, and occasionally, I could still hear the breathing years after we moved out. It was like it followed me, but it didn't stick around. We moved back to Wyoming when I was 14, and I haven't heard it since. For some background information, when we first moved into this house, my mum and I had some strange happenings. We would be poked. My dad doesn't believe in any of this, and my brother is skeptical. He became more of a believer when a razor was thrown at his head. After my mum and I got poked, everyone, including us, joked about it and said it was a friendly house ghost, and we named him Joe. So ever since then, we blamed anything we could on Joe, even the stupid stuff like who ate the last piece, just as a joke. I've had many other encounters with the paranormal. For the past 5-ish years, it has been calm with few encounters, until about a week or two ago. I, 15 years old, got home with my mum. I went to drop my backpack off in my room, and I stopped dead in my tracks in the hallway. I saw a very short, black figure run into my room and under my bed. It looked like someone's legs from the knees down. At first, I called my dog, which loves to sleep under my bed. Keep in mind, this dog, Rosie, is a mix between a golden retriever and cattle dog, so short and brown goldish coloring. She came running from the other side of the house, so she was off my list of what it could be. Next, Maybe my macaw, much less likely, but possible. Unfortunately, she was still in her cage locked up. So I brushed it off, thinking that I just saw something that wasn't there, and didn't give it a thought after that. Last night, my mum was sitting at her desk, which allows her to see straight down the hallway into my room, and started calling my name to see where I was. I was in my bed scrolling through my phone. After she found out I was in my room, she called out to my brother with worry in her voice, but he was asleep in his bed. Now she was scared. I yelled out to her, asking what it was, and she said she thought she saw something in my room. Usually, I'm super paranoid at night, but I felt safe, like there was something protecting me. This morning, my mum asked if I saw something in my room, or if I felt a presence. I said I felt a little off, but safe. Me being curious, I asked what she saw last night, and she said she saw something that looked like legs from the knees down, run from her room into my room. I froze. Maybe I really did see legs under my bed, or it was just something my mum and I thought we saw, but didn't. Maybe it was Joe. I've had a few encounters over my lifetime, but these stick out to me as the worst. The first occurrence I'd like to mention took place when I was about 4 or 5, and my dad usually read bedtime stories to me every night. Before I continue, I'd like to mention that my parents were never married, and even though their relationship ended, they lived together in the same house for my sake. So my parents had their own rooms, and I had my own, but I usually slept with my mum anyway. On this particular night, my dad was reading to me in my mum's room before she got home from work, and we both ended up falling asleep. I remember waking up and I was laying across my dad with my knees planted in the bed on the right side of him. I saw a silhouette standing in the middle of the room, staring at the wall. And then my eyes adjusted. I realized it was my mum, or so I thought. I called out to her, called and called, and she wouldn't stop staring at the wall. Then here's where it gets more weird. The wall proceeds to open up, and I see like a darkish cave-looking area, and a man standing over a huge pot stirring it. And my mum just started walking slowly towards it and didn't acknowledge me one bit. She enters the wall and it closes. Me being freaked out woke my dad up frantically, saying the wall took Mummy. Where's Mummy? The wall, Daddy. It took Mummy. He said, no, Kiba, Mummy's okay. She's asleep in your room. I don't know how he knew that info. So I jumped out of my bed and ran to my room, and lo and behold, there was my mum fast asleep. So what did I see? What could it mean? I know I wasn't sleeping, because as soon as that wall closed, I freaked out and started waking up my dad. So it's not like I can soothe myself by saying maybe it was a dream. The second occurrence took place when I was in high school, and my parents usually call me to wake me up from downstairs, and whenever you open the door to the room, you could see the glow of the TV light from downstairs, as well as the ceiling lights illuminating the stairs. On this particular school morning, I heard my dad calling my name as per usual, in a sort of whispered voice, but loud enough for me to hear it. I answered I'm up. I opened my room door to pitch darkness. The TV and ceiling lights were off, and my parents were in their respective rooms fast asleep. I remember being so freaked out about it, I told a good friend while we were out one evening. And I can't remember how this gentleman entered the picture, but he did, and he was a religious figure, so I was telling him what happened, and he said to me, whenever that happens, never answer them, ignore them, and say, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." And I thought to myself, good job, dummy, you answered them. So what was it? And why were they calling me? Did they want to hurt me? I remember feeling petrified. The third occurrence I can remember is when I was 12 years old. I was extremely ill, and the doctors couldn't find what was wrong with me. They tried everything. My mum, being desperate, listened to her friend and took me to a faith healer who had some interesting methods. She had me do some weird things, but what is interesting is this woman knew things I didn't even tell my mum. Like, I was bullied mercilessly at school, and one of the girls wished me harm. There was one girl in particular I was extremely afraid of, and she was very threatening, so I guessed it was her. She also asked me if I've ever laid in bed and felt the bed shift slightly. It was a peculiar question, but I did indeed feel my bed shift on occasion. One could chalk it up to earthquakes, but it happened far too often, and each time an earthquake was never mentioned on the news. Plus, the way the bed moved, it didn't feel like it would during an earthquake. She said an evil spirit is under my bed, and that my grandfather's spirit is trying to protect me, but the entity won't let him, and it's a battle over me, hence the bed shifting. My granddad had just died, and my mum's friends didn't even know, so he didn't tell her. She gave me a special kind of soap to wash with, and told us to float the washcloth at sea when done, and she prayed over my house. Again, my mum was desperate because I was so ill, and the doctors couldn't figure it out, so she tried what the lady said, not expecting anything, but hoping. It did nothing to improve my health, to her dismay, but I never again felt that bad shift, or felt uneasy in that room again. For some background, I had some experiences seeing shadow people as a child, but in the past 10 to 12 years, I haven't really experienced anything other than a weird shape in my peripheral vision, or a weird feeling of being watched. Nothing too major. That was until the night of the 23rd of December. I couldn't really sleep that night because I had been working a late shift and was kind of in an energetic mood. Weirdly though, that afternoon when I was sitting on my bed, putting my shoes on, I could have sworn I felt something touch my foot from under my bed. I didn't really pay much attention to it. I just remember thinking, oh god, that's weird. But it was the middle of the day, and I was running late. Anyway, that night, once I did finally get to sleep, I kept being awoken by scratching noises. That sounds a lot scarier than it is, because we always get mice in our attic at winter, so it really wasn't anything new or scary. However, the third or fourth time it woke me up, it startled me because it sounded different. This time, it sounded like, I guess I would say, it sounded like someone really lightly running their finger along the wall, not scratching or anything, just like someone really, really lightly running a finger along the wall. I also noticed that my wardrobe door was open. In my culture, there's a lot of superstition surrounding specifically wardrobe doors being open. I actually have a string keeping it closed, which would have been untied to open the wardrobe. This immediately made me think something spooky was afoot, but I was so tired that I was just happy to ignore it. Anyway, I turned on the light, and of course, there was nothing to be seen. So I got a drink, took a few breaths, and went back to sleep. I then awoke at around 7 AM, lying on my side facing the wall. For some reason, I got this overwhelming urge to turn around, and before I knew it, I was already rolled over. I noticed there was what looked to be a shadow man. I'm not sure why, but I had the distinct sense it was male, standing about 1 meter away from the side of my bed. I got the feeling it was facing me, but strangely, it had no head. It wasn't like it had been decapitated or anything gruesome like that. It just had an interrupted line of sight from one shoulder to the other. As well as that, I remember it not having any hands, like its arms just ended in a sort of rounded point. I also immediately noticed that it was quite small, maybe 5 feet tall, possibly less. I'm 5'11", and I could tell it was a decent bit shorter than me. I did not feel threatened at all at the time. I just saw it, thought, oh wow, this is actually happening, and then immediately thought, this isn't what I imagined you to look like. For reference, as a child, I remember frequently seeing a huge shadow figure pretty often, so in my mind, that's what a shadow person was supposed to look like. Anyway, I then snapped out of it and dove for the night switch. This meant passing by the entity in order to reach the switch. It didn't move or run or anything. It just stood there. When I passed it though, I did notice a coldness in the area, and the air feeling thick or dense. That's the only way I can think of to describe it. As soon as the light was on, it began to fade into like a smoke, but there was still a clear outline of it for a few seconds. The best way I can describe it is like, you know when it's really hot outside, and you can see the heat waves rising off the road? Yeah, well, it looked exactly like that wavy air, but in the shape of a shadow. I'm from Ireland, and assuming this was one of the she, I asked it to leave in Irish. I then felt the newfound sense of dread momentarily lift. But then I sat back down on my bed and kind of processed my thoughts. I felt a rush of cold air come towards me, and I did feel a sense of anger or annoyance, but I can't explain where or what it was coming from. Almost as if the air was angry at me. Naturally, I decided that this was a battle I was not willing to fight and left the room. As soon as I closed the door though, I noticed that my 2 pet ferrets were both wide awake and had all their fur standing fully on end. I brought them into my room then, and they both immediately started hissing and puffing their fur up at something. I've never in my life seen them act this way, so it really did freak me out. I'd been hoping just to pass this off as some sort of hallucination, but their actions, unfortunately, made me feel quite justified in my fears. I was initially worried that it was the thedude of Irish folklore, a shadow man of the she who acts as a warning of your death. But it doesn't fit any of the descriptions of him from our mythology, which honestly was the best Christmas surprise ever. Fully thought I was a goner there for a while. Okay, so last night I was on a Discord call late at night with a friend, listening to music. It was about 2:40 AM, when I said I was tired and headed to bed. I was laying down, when all of a sudden, I felt something bump the underside of my bed, which would have been impossible since that's where I store most of my stuff. Then, right after, I hear scuttling, and I'm like, for crying out loud, and throw a book. I can feel the same angry presence that I felt before, and I see a half-lit face with a wide open eye in the corner of my vision. Now, over the past few days, I've been seeing this same face with varying degrees of age, but all the same expression. So, me being very tired and annoyed, yell out to the room, "Ah, get lost," and I hear growling from under my bed. Then I open my laptop again to tell my friend what's going on, and it looked like the screen was being tapped. You know when you press against the laptop screen, you see the liquid move in ripples. and it leaves that spot for a second. Yeah, that's what was happening, and it quietened down for about 30 seconds, until I saw the face again, but really close and boring into me. And like before, I wasn't scared at all after that happened. I was like, holy crap. I say, look buddy, want me to turn another YouTube video on like last time, huh? So I opened YouTube, clicked a random video in my recommendations, and just let it play. I was staring at the screen when in the corner of my eye, I could see a figure resting its head in its arms on the side of my bed, looking at my screen. After the video finished, I said, happy now? And nothing happened. So I finally got my night's sleep. I really don't know what to do. I hope it doesn't get worse. I grew up in the same house since I was 3 years old, and only moved to a new house about a year ago. A few creepy things happened in the years I lived there, and here are some 3-ish short experiences before a longer one. When I was in elementary school, there was a bump under the carpet where my closet doors used to be. I asked my parents about it, and they told me it was probably just warped wood, but I was convinced it was a dead person, and nobody could tell me otherwise. Ever since I can remember, I felt a pressure on the foot of my bed before I fall asleep. The same sensation as someone walking or standing on your bed while you lie in it. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, but ever since my family moved to this new house and I moved into my college dorms, I have not experienced the same sensation. When I was in middle school, I was getting ready for bed as per usual. The way our old house is set up is a stairway leading up to a balcony, looking over the living room, and a long hallway to the only 3 bedrooms and bathroom in the middle. I was walking towards the bathroom by the balcony. I turned and saw a large dark shadow jump from the balcony. I ran to the edge and looked down thinking it was my brother or my dad. Nothing was at the bottom, and my dad walked out from his room and asked me what I was doing. I replied with a shocked, nothing. Maybe a year or 2 later, I was sitting in bed late at night, texting my friends as preteens do. My bed was a twin size, with a mold metal frame and these wooden boards at the bottom to hold the mattress. I felt something push hard up on the wooden boards and mattress. I heard the boards impact on the metal frame. This scared the absolute crap out of me. It took me about 10 minutes to get the courage to look under my bed, rationalizing it as a prank my older brother was playing on me. When I looked under, nothing was there. I kept the lights on that night. To get a better picture of my room, I lived in the top right corner of the house, 2 windows, a wall shared with my parents' room, my closet wall connected to my brother's room, and 2 walls facing outside, each with a window. We only had 1 tree in the front yard, of which I was nowhere close to, and my neighbors had a tree in their backyard, also unable to reach my room. I'm also, if it wasn't clear, on the 2nd floor of the house. Keep this in mind. When I was in high school, sitting in bed one night, staying up late, I was about to fall asleep when I hear this long, loud, slow scratching on my wall facing the street. It begins at the wall separating me from my parents' room, continued, and ended at where the closet started. It went back and forth probably 3 or 4 times and stopped. It started at exactly 11 PM. It scared the hell out of me, but I tried to chalk it up to mice. The same thing happened again the following night at the exact same time. This time, there was a shadow in the window. I always kept my blinds closed since the streetlight lit up my entire room. So you can imagine my horror. when I looked at the window to see the well-defined shadow of some kind of creature as the sound of the long, terrible scratch filled my ears. I didn't move. I blinked, and the shadow was gone, and the scratching stopped. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I prayed to God to save me. The next night, I was over it. I put salt on the windows and hung a cross on a drawstring over the blinds. I stayed up until 11 waiting for the scratching. It never came, and I haven't heard it since. I can't rationalize this one. I want to get rid of every possibility of a situation before I blame ghosts, but I just can't explain this one.